Part 1. The Promise. I still remember the day my stepsister Laura came into my life. I was 17, she was 15, and both of our worlds had been turned upside down when my father married her mother after a whirlwind 6-month romance following my mother's death. "This is going to be great, Thomas," my father had said, his arm draped awkwardly around my shoulders as we stood in the driveway watching Laura and her mother, Catherine, unpack their belongings. "You'll have a sister now, someone to look out for." I'd nodded silently, still processing my grief over my mother, who had succumbed to cancer just 14 months earlier. The idea of suddenly acquiring a stepsister and stepmother felt like a betrayal to her memory, though I tried my best to hide these feelings from my father. Laura was quiet and studious, with dark hair that fell over her face when she was concentrating. Unlike the stereotype of the resentful stepsister, she never treated me with animosity. Instead, she seemed grateful for the stability my father provided after years of struggling with her own father, who had abandoned the family when she was just 10 years old. Over the next year, before I left for college, we developed an unexpected friendship. We weren't exactly close, both of us were too reserved for that, but there was a mutual respect that made our blended family situation tolerable, sometimes even pleasant. The night before I left for college, Laura knocked timidly on my bedroom door. It was past midnight, and I was still packing, surrounded by cardboard boxes and half-filled suitcases. "Can I come in?" she asked, hovering in the doorway. "Sure," I said, clearing a space on my bed. "Can't sleep?" She shook her head, sitting down and hugging her knees to her chest. "I'm gonna miss having you around," she admitted quietly. "You've made all of this easier." "I'm going to miss having you around," she admitted quietly. "I'm going to miss having you around," she admitted quietly. "I hope you have a good time out in nature. I've been missing you around. You've made all of this easier. Enjoy everything." I was surprised by her candor. "Thanks, you too, actually." "Thomas," her voice was hesitant, "can I ask you something important?" "Of course. Do you think I could go to college someday? Like really go, not just community college?" Her eyes, usually downcast, met mine with unusual intensity. I was taken aback by the question. "Of course you can. You're smart, Laura. Probably smarter than me." She smiled slightly before her expression fell again. "My mom's been putting away a little money each month, but it's not much. And my real dad, well, you know he's not exactly reliable." I understood then. Laura was worried about her future, about being able to afford college. My father was comfortable financially, not wealthy, but stable enough that paying for my education had never been a concern. But my father and Catherine had been clear that his money was for my education, while Catherine would be responsible for Laura's. It was a prenuptial agreement detail I'd overheard during one of their late-night discussions. "Listen," I said impulsively, "if you ever need help with college, I'll be there. Once I'm working, I mean. After I graduate." Her eyes widened. "You don't have to say that." "I mean it," I insisted, feeling a sudden protectiveness I hadn't expected. "You deserve a chance at whatever future you want. Promise me you'll apply to the schools you really want. Not just the ones you think you can afford." Laura's smile was small but genuine. "I promise, if you promise you won't forget about us while you're off becoming a successful engineer." "Deal," I said, holding out my hand to shake on it. It was a simple moment of connection between two teenagers thrown together by circumstance. I had no idea then how significantly that casual promise would shape both our lives in the years to come. Part 2. The Sacrifice. 8 years passed. I graduated with my engineering degree, landed a good job with a technology firm in Boston, and was steadily climbing the corporate ladder. I had my own apartment, a serious girlfriend named Melissa, and the beginnings of what I hoped would be a successful career. I kept in touch with home through weekly calls with my father and occasional text exchanges with Laura, who was now in her final year of high school. She had blossomed into a confident young woman with dreams of becoming a doctor, specifically an oncologist, inspired by the doctors who had tried to save my mother. It was during one of my monthly visits home that Laura revealed she'd been accepted to several prestigious universities, including her dream school, Johns Hopkins. My father and Catherine had organized a small celebration dinner, and Laura was glowing with pride and excitement. "I can't believe they all said yes," she kept saying, staring at the acceptance letters arranged on the dining room table. "Of course they did," my father said, raising his glass. "You've worked hard. You deserve this." Later that evening, I found Laura alone in the kitchen, her earlier jubilation replaced by a pensive expression as she washed dishes. "What's wrong?" I asked, grabbing a towel to help dry. "You should be celebrating, not doing chores?" She sighed, her hands submerged in soapy water. "It doesn't matter where I got accepted. We can't afford any of them, not even with financial aid. Mom's been honest about that." My heart sank. "What about scholarships? You've got the grades." "I've applied for dozens," she said. "But even if I get some, there's still going to be a huge gap. State school is looking like the only option, and even that's going to be tight." I remembered my promise from years ago. I was doing well financially, not extravagantly so, but comfortably. I had been saving for a down payment on a house, thinking Melissa and I might take that step soon. But this felt important too. "What if I help?" I offered. "I could cover what scholarships and financial aid don't." Laura stopped washing, turning to look at me with disbelief. Thomas, these are expensive schools. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars." "I know," I said, suddenly certain, "but I promised, remember? The night before I left for college, and I'm doing well enough now to help. You should go to Johns Hopkins if that's where you want to be." "Dad would never allow it," she said, but I could see hope flickering in her eyes. "Let me talk to him," I replied. That conversation with my father went exactly as I expected. He refused outright, citing pride and responsibility. "It's not your burden, Thomas," he insisted. "Catherine and I will figure something out for Laura." But I knew there wasn't much to figure out. Catherine worked as an elementary school administrator, and while my father was comfortable, supporting a second child through an expensive university wasn't something they had planned for. So I made a decision without further consultation. When Laura was accepted to Johns Hopkins with a partial scholarship that still left a $26,000 annual gap, I secretly arranged to pay the difference directly to the university. I told Laura what I had done only after it was finalized, swearing her to secrecy to avoid upsetting my father and Catherine. "I'll pay you back someday," she promised tearfully over the phone. "Every penny." "No need," I assured her. "Just become the best doctor you can be." That's repayment enough. For the next 4 years, I lived more frugally than my colleagues. I continued sharing an apartment with roommates instead of getting my own place. I drove my old college car rather than upgrading. Melissa and I postponed discussions about engagement and a house. Each semester, I quietly transferred the tuition money along with a little extra for books and living expenses. In total, over those 4 years, I contributed $72,000 to Laura's education, money I never regretted giving, even as it delayed my own life plans. Laura thrived at Johns Hopkins, graduating with honors and immediately being accepted to medical school. I was immensely proud of her and satisfied with my decision to help. What I hadn't anticipated was how everything would unravel when the truth finally came out. Part 3. The Confrontation. The revelation came during Laura's medical school graduation party. She had finished near the top of her class and had been accepted to a prestigious residency program. My father and Catherine had organized a backyard celebration at their house, inviting family and Laura's closest friends. I had flown in from Boston with Melissa, who was now my fiancée after a proposal that had been delayed by several years due to my financial commitments to Laura's education. We had finally saved enough for a modest engagement ring and were beginning to plan our wedding. During the party, Laura gave a speech thanking everyone for their support. I wasn't prepared for what came next, but there's one person without whom none of this would have been possible, she said, her voice thick with emotion. My brother Thomas. When no one else could help, he stepped up and paid for my undergraduate degree, all $72,000 that scholarships and loans didn't cover. He put his own life on hold to make sure I could follow my dreams. A stunned silence fell over the gathering. I felt the blood drain from my face as my father's head snapped in my direction, his expression transforming from confusion to anger in an instant. "What is she talking about, Thomas?" he demanded, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Laura looked stricken, suddenly realizing she had revealed our secret. I thought you knew," she stammered. I thought we need to talk," my father interrupted, standing abruptly. "Inside, now." I followed him into the kitchen, aware of the awkward murmurs behind us as the party guests pretended not to notice the sudden tension. "Explain yourself," my father said as soon as the door closed behind us. "You've been paying for Laura's education behind our backs for 4 years?" "Yes," I admitted. "She wanted to go to Johns Hopkins, and there was no way she could afford it otherwise. I was in a position to help." "That wasn't your decision to make," he snapped. "Catherine and I are her parents. We had a plan. State school, community college for 2 years first, then transfer. It was affordable, sensible." "But it wasn't what she wanted," I countered. "She deserved better." "And who are you to decide that? To undermine our parental authority? To make us look like we couldn't provide for our daughter?" I was taken aback by his focus on appearances rather than Laura's achievements. "This wasn't about you, Dad. It was about Laura having the same opportunities I had." "The same opportunities?" he scoffed. "I paid for your education because you're my son. Catherine is responsible for Laura's education. That was the agreement. An agreement that was limiting her future," I said, my own anger rising now. "Laura is brilliant. She deserved Johns Hopkins. And now she's going to be an incredible doctor. Isn't that what matters?" "What matters is respect," my father retorted. "Respect for the decisions Catherine and I made as parents. You went behind our backs, made us look incompetent, and now you're standing there looking superior about it." I shook my head in disbelief. "This isn't about looking superior. It's about family helping family." "Family?" My father's voice rose. "You're not even her real brother. What was this really about, Thomas? Trying to play the hero? Showing off how successful you are now?" His words stung more than I wanted to admit. "She is my sister, Dad. Maybe not by blood, but in all the ways that matter." The kitchen door opened, and Laura stood there, tears streaking her face. She had obviously overheard at least part of our argument. "Please stop," she said. "I never meant to cause trouble. Thomas was just helping me. If I had known it would create this much conflict, I never would have accepted." My father's expression softened slightly at the sight of Laura's distress, but when he turned back to me, his eyes were cold. "She deserves respect, not you," he barked. "After everything, you're still the selfish one, Thomas, making grand gestures without considering the consequences for anyone else." "Consequences?" I repeated incredulously. "The consequence is that Laura got to attend her dream school and is now a doctor. How is that a bad thing? The consequence is that you've undermined our family structure, embarrassed Catherine and me in front of everyone, and acted like you know better than we do about raising the child we're responsible for." Laura stepped between us, her graduation gown still on, the tassel from her cap swinging as she moved. "Stop it, both of you. This is supposed to be a celebration." My father took a deep breath, visibly trying to control his temper. "You're right, Laura. I'm sorry." He shot me a final glare. "We'll discuss this later, Thomas. For now, let's go back outside. People are waiting." As he brushed past me, he muttered, "Some things never change. Always have to be the center of attention, don't you?" I stood frozen in the kitchen, stunned by the unexpected confrontation and my father's harsh words. Laura lingered, her expression torn between gratitude and guilt. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea he didn't know. I just assumed all this time." "It's not your fault," I assured her, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Go enjoy your party. You've earned it." She hesitated. "Are you coming back out?" I shook my head. "I think I need a few minutes." After Laura left, I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to process what had just happened. How had my act of helping my stepsister turned into such a disaster? Why was my father so angry about something that had ultimately benefited Laura? Melissa found me there a few minutes later, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" Everyone outside heard, well, enough to know that something's wrong. "My father thinks I betrayed him," I said numbly, "by helping Laura." Melissa took my hand. "You did a wonderful thing for her, Thomas. Maybe your father just needs time to see past his pride." "Maybe," I said, though I doubted it would be that simple. The look in my father's eyes had revealed something beyond just anger. There was disappointment, even contempt, as if by helping Laura, I had somehow diminished him. "Should we leave?" Melissa asked gently. I considered the option. It would be easier to walk away, to return to Boston and give my father time to cool down. But that felt like running away. "No," I decided. "This is Laura's day. I won't ruin it by causing more drama. We'll stay, keep things civil, and deal with the fallout later." With a deep breath, I pushed myself away from the counter and prepared to rejoin the celebration outside, where my father's cold stare and Laura's guilty glances awaited me. What I didn't realize then was that this confrontation would mark the beginning of a profound rift in our family, one that would force all of us to re-examine our relationships, our motivations, and the true meaning of respect. Part 4, the aftermath. The rest of Laura's graduation party passed in a blur of forced smiles and uncomfortable small talk. My father maintained a cold distance, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary and with the bare minimum of civility. Catherine seemed caught between loyalty to her husband and gratitude for what I had done for her daughter, resulting in awkward, truncated conversations that trailed off into silence. Melissa and I left early the next morning, cutting our planned week-long visit down to just the weekend. The drive to the airport was quiet, both of us processing the unexpected fallout from Laura's well-intentioned revelation. "He'll come around," Melissa said, as we waited at our gate, "once the initial shock wears off." I wasn't so sure. You didn't see his face, Mel. This wasn't just about the money or even about going behind his back. There was something deeper there. Like what? I stared out at the planes taxiing on the runway. I don't know. Maybe he feels like I was trying to replace him somehow. Or show him up? That's ridiculous, Melissa said firmly. You were just helping your sister. Stepsister, I corrected automatically, then winced as I realized I was echoing my father's distinction. The weeks following the confrontation were marked by silence from my father. Our regular Sunday calls ceased without explanation. When I tried calling him, the conversations were brief and formal, devoid of the warmth that had characterized our relationship for years. Laura, on the other hand, called me frequently, alternating between apologies for causing the rift and profound gratitude for my support. I still can't believe I was so stupid, she said during one call. I really thought they knew. All those years. I just assumed Mond had figured it out and told your dad. Stop apologizing, I told her. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I, regardless of what Dad thinks. He's being so stubborn about this, Laura sighed. Mom keeps trying to talk to him, but he shuts down the conversation every time. A month after the graduation party, I received an unexpected call from Catherine. It was the first time she had ever called me directly, instead of just saying hello when I was on the phone with my father or Laura. Thomas, she began without preamble, I need to explain something about your father's reaction. I'm listening, I said, curious and a little apprehensive. Catherine sighed heavily. When your father and I got married, we were very clear about our financial responsibilities. He would take care of you. I would take care of Laura. It wasn't just a practical arrangement. For your father, it was a point of pride that he could support both you and me without needing my financial contribution. I know about the prenup, I said. I overheard you discussing it years ago. Then you know that your father isn't a wealthy man, Catherine continued. He's comfortable, but supporting 2 households through college was beyond his means. When we married, he made it clear that while he would love Laura as his own, her education would remain my responsibility. That seems fair, I acknowledged, still not understanding why this justified his reaction. What you don't know, Catherine said, her voice softening, is that before Laura's graduation, your father had been working with a financial advisor, trying to find a way to help with her medical school expenses. He'd been working overtime, considering a second mortgage on the house, all to surprise Laura with the news that he wanted to contribute to her medical degree. My stomach dropped. He never mentioned any of this, because he wanted it to be a surprise. And then at the party, he learned that not only had you already covered her undergraduate expenses, but you'd done it secretly, making him feel. She paused, searching for the right word. Inadequate, I finished for her. Suddenly, my father's reaction made more sense. It wasn't just about authority or appearances. It was about his sense of self-worth as a provider. Exactly, Catherine said. I'm not saying his reaction was right or fair to you, but I thought you should understand where it's coming from. After that conversation, I tried repeatedly to reach out to my father, to explain that I had never intended to undermine him or make him feel insufficient. Each attempt was met with brief acknowledgments, but no real engagement. It was Laura who finally broke the stalemate nearly 3 months after her graduation. This has gone on long enough, she declared during a 3-way call she'd orchestrated between herself, my father, and me. I'm not going to let my achievement tear this family apart. Laura, honey, this isn't about you, my father began. Yes, it is, she interrupted with a firmness I'd never heard from her before. It's about me and Thomas and you and Mom. It's about family and pride and misunderstandings, and it stops now. There was a long silence before Laura continued, her voice gentler but no less determined. Dad, because that's what you are to me. My dad in all the ways that matter. Thomas helped me because he could, and because he promised me years ago that he would. He didn't do it to make you look bad or to take your place. He did it because that's who he is, someone who keeps his promises and helps the people he loves. I heard my father draw a shaky breath on the other end of the line. And Thomas, Laura continued, Dad was hurt because he loves me too, and providing for family is important to him. It's not just about money, it's about his role in my life. You bypassing him made him feel sidelined in a decision that affected his daughter. Stepdaughter, my father corrected quietly, but without the hostility that had characterized his previous use of the distinction. No, Laura said firmly. Your daughter. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. You taught me that, Dad. From the day you married Mom and welcomed me into your home. And Thomas is my brother, not just my stepbrother, for the same reason. There was another long silence, broken finally by my father's voice, sounding older and more vulnerable than I had ever heard him. I was going to help with medical school, he admitted. Had it all planned out. Then at the party, I felt blindsided, replaced, like I hadn't done enough. Dad, I said, my voice thick with emotion, I never meant to replace you or show you up. I was just keeping a promise I made to Laura years ago. I should have talked to you about it first, and I'm sorry I didn't. And I should have thanked you instead of attacking you, my father replied. Your mother, she would have been so proud of what you did for Laura. I should have been too. The mention of my mother, rare from my father even all these years later, broke something open inside me. I miss her, I said simply. I know, son. Me too. We talked for over an hour that night, the three of us, beginning the slow process of healing the rift that had opened between us. It wasn't a magical resolution. There were still hurt feelings and misunderstandings to work through, but it was a start. 2 weeks later, my father called me directly for the first time since the confrontation. I've been thinking, he said after we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries, about what you did for Laura. It was a good thing, Thomas, a generous thing. I was wrong to react the way I did. Thanks, Dad, I said, relief washing over me. That means a lot. Catherine and I have set up a small fund for Laura's residency expenses, he continued. Nothing grand, just enough to help with rent and living costs, while her stipend covers the basics. We'd like you to contribute too, if you want. As a family, together this time. I smiled, recognizing the olive branch he was extending. I'd like that very much. And Thomas, you were right about one thing. Laura deserved Johns Hopkins. She deserved the best chance we could give her. He paused. And you deserve respect for making that happen, not the way I treated you. Coming from my proud father, this was as close to a full apology as I was likely to get. Thanks, Dad. That means everything. When I hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The past months had been difficult, revealing fault lines in our family I hadn't known existed. But they had also revealed something else. The true strength of the bonds we had built, not through blood, but through choice. Through years of shared experiences and mutual care. Laura called later that evening, her voice light with relief. Dad told me about your conversation. I can't believe it's finally resolved. Family is complicated, I said, but worth it. Always, she agreed. And Thomas, I meant what I said about paying you back someday. I laughed. Just be the best doctor you can be. That's all the repayment I need. Too bad, she replied with a smile in her voice, because I've already decided that your future children are getting the world's most attentive pediatrician, free of charge for life. Deal, I said, thinking of the future Melissa and I were now planning, the house we would finally buy, the family we hoped to start. though I might draw the line if you try to name your firstborn after me." Laura's laugh echoed through the phone. "No promises, big brother. No promises at all." As I ended the call, I reflected on the strange winding path that had brought us here. What had begun as a simple promise between step-siblings had evolved into a complex drama of family dynamics, pride, and reconciliation. But through it all, one truth remained constant. Family, whether formed by blood, marriage, or choice, was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, and ultimately, worth the difficult work of understanding and forgiveness. In helping Laura achieve her dreams, I had discovered something important about my own values and priorities. And in weathering this storm together, our blended family had emerged stronger, more honest, and more genuinely connected than before. That, I realized, was the most valuable outcome of all.